Greetings, dear fans of the grim darkness of the distant future. Astartes Legends here, and today we'll delve into one of the most captivating alternate histories of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. What if the greatest battle in human history had ended differently? What if it had been not the Emperor who had triumphed aboard the Vengeful Spirit, but his beloved traitorous son, Horus Lupercal? How would the fate of the galaxy have changed if the forces of chaos had triumphed in the siege of Terra? Today, we'll examine in detail the many scenarios of this alternate timeline, from the immediate aftermath to the fate of humanity millennia later. We'll examine what would have happened to the Loyalist legions, how the traitors would have evolved, and how the galaxy's other races would have reacted to the triumph of chaos. If you're interested in an in-depth analysis of the Warhammer 40K universe, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. This will help the algorithms show this content to other fans. Turn on the bell to stay up to date with new alternative histories and lore analyses. Now let us journey into the dark, grim darkness of the distant future, where Horus has triumphed. The Siege of Terra became the greatest conflict in human history, a battle that determined the fate of not only the Imperium, but the entire galaxy for the next 10 millennia. In the canonical narrative, the Emperor of Mankind achieved a Pyrrhic victory over his beloved son, Horus Lupercal, aboard the battle barge Spirit Avenger, at the cost of his own life and the future of humanity. But what if the outcome of this conflict had been different? What if the War Master's blade had found its place in the Emperor's heart before the psychic power of the anathema destroyed the traitor's soul? This question opens up a myriad of alternative paths for the galaxy's development, each leading to its own darkness. In this essay, we will analyze multiple scenarios following Horus's hypothetical victory, consider the fate of humanity under the rule of chaos, the consequences for other races in the galaxy, and the long-term prospects for intelligent life in the Milky Way. Scenario A: complete subjugation of chaos. In the first and most bleak scenario, Horus had completely lost the last vestiges of his humanity by the time of the final battle, becoming a perfect puppet of the Four. The Emperor, weakened by his psychic duel with Magnus, the breach into the Imperial underworld labyrinth, and the need to maintain the Astronomican, was unable to resist the combined might of all the dark gods, embodied in the body of his son. In this scenario, the Emperor's death becomes not just physical annihilation, but the complete absorption of his soul into the warp. The Golden Throne explodes in a catastrophic release of psychic energy, instantly killing thousands of Astronomican psychers and ripping apart the veil of reality over Terra. The human warp conduit, guarded by the Emperor's will for decades, breaks free, and Terra is transformed into a new Eye of Terror, a demon world forever fused with the Immaterium. Scenario B: controlled fall. The second option suggests that Horus, though corrupted by chaos, retains some degree of autonomy and rationality. He slays the Emperor in single combat, but understands the catastrophic consequences of Terra's total destruction. The War Master orders his forces to seize control of the Golden Throne in the palace, minimizing the destruction of the planet's critical infrastructure. In this version of events, Horus attempts to become the new master of humanity, using chaos as a tool of power, rather than submitting to it entirely. It's an incredibly fragile balance, predicated on the illusion that mortals can control forces that, by their very nature, seek absolute domination and destruction. Scenario B: the traitor's Pyrrhic victory. The third scenario is the most tragic in its irony. Horus kills the Emperor, but at the moment of the Master of Mankind's death, a psychic explosion of such magnitude occurs that the War Master is mortally wounded or falls into a comatose state. The traitors technically win, capturing the palace and Terra, but their leader is incapacitated, leading to an immediate schism among the Traitor Legions. The fate of Terra and the solar system. Regardless of the specific scenario, the fall of Terra marks its end as the center of human civilization as it existed. The billions of lives lost during the siege pale in comparison to what will follow the traitor's victory. In Scenario A, Terra literally falls into the warp. The planet's material reality is distorted beyond recognition. Majestic palaces are transformed into impossible labyrinths where the laws of physics no longer apply. Oceans boil away or turn into seas of blood, and the atmosphere is filled with psychic energy. The surviving population either goes mad, mutates into creatures of chaos, or becomes enslaved by demons. Terra becomes a demon capital world from which traitors will rule the remnants of the Imperium. The solar system will not escape a similar fate. Mars, already partially fallen to dark mechanics, is completely controlled by scrap code and demonic engines. The sacred Red City is transformed into a hellish factory, churning out demonic war machines. Other planets in the system are either destroyed during the Purge of Loyalists or become bases for various Traitor Legions, each of which begins carving out their own personal fiefdoms. In Scenario B, Horus attempts to maintain Terra's functionality as an administrative center. The Golden Throne is repurposed for the War Master's needs. Perhaps Horus himself is placed there if his body is too damaged, or a machine is used to enhance his psychic abilities. The Astronomican continues to operate, but is fueled not by thousands of psychers per day, but by mass sacrifices of Terra's population to the dark gods. The planet becomes a gigantic altar, where rituals of unimaginable scale are performed daily, split among traitors. Even in their moment of triumph, the seeds of future conflict are already sown among the Traitor Legions. The 9 Traitor Legions were never a single entity, united by Horus's charisma and a common enemy, but not by ideology or purpose. The sons of Horus, seeing their Primarch at the pinnacle of power, expect to become a privileged caste in a new order. The Word-bearers, long dedicated to chaos, demand a theocracy centered on the worship of the dark gods. The Iron Warriors desire a practical military dictatorship. The World Eaters are uninterested in politics. They seek only blood and skulls. The Thousand Sons desire access to the forbidden knowledge of Terra. The Night Lords despise all others and seek only to sow fear. The Death Guard seek to spread the gifts of Nurgle. The Emperor's children are lost in their own perverse pleasures. The Alpha Legion has its own plans, known only to them. In Scenario A, this conflict of interests is temporarily contained by the direct intervention of the Chaos Gods, each of whom advances their champions and demands their share of power. In Scenario B, Horus attempts to balance between the factions, but his power becomes increasingly nominal. In Scenario C, an open war for succession begins between the legions, each laying claim to the throne of Terra. The fate of the Loyalist Legions. For the surviving defenders of Terra, the darkest hour begins. Rogel Dorn likely perishes in a last, desperate attack on the Spirit Avenger, along with the Emperor and Sanguinius. Jagatai Khan and his White Scars find themselves cut off from the main force, possibly in another part of the palace or beyond. The 3 remaining Loyalist Primarchs, Rabuti Guilliman, Leman Russ, and Lionel Johnson, receive the horrific news of Terra's fall from different vantage points in the galaxy. Their reactions and subsequent actions will determine the fate of the Resistance. Guilliman, with his Ultramarines, the most numerous legion, immediately proclaims Ultramar the last bastion of the true Imperium. He refuses to acknowledge the legitimacy of Horus's rule and begins to rally the remnants of Loyalist forces around him. Ultramar closes in, turning into a besieged fortress, bracing for the inevitable traitorous counterattack. Leman Russ and his Space Wolves, still nursing their wounds from Prospero, are enraged. Ragnar rejects any tactics short of total annihilation. The Wolves launch a guerrilla campaign against the traitors, striking where least expected and vanishing before reinforcements can arrive. Lionel Johnson finds himself in a dire situation. Caliban is already mired in Luther's betrayal, and with news of Terra's fall, the Dark Angels are on the brink of complete disintegration. Lion is forced to make an impossible choice between returning home to resolve his internal conflict or joining the fight against Horus. Vulcan, Corvus Corax, and Ferrus Manus, if he somehow survived or was resurrected by Chaos as a mockery, must also determine their position. The Salamanders and Raven Guard, both badly battered, become the core of a guerrilla resistance, employing tactics of surprise strikes and sabotage. Imperium in Exile, or Civil War 2.0. The first decades after the fall of Terra are characterized by absolute chaos, in both senses of the word. The Imperium effectively fragments into numerous fragments, each claiming legitimacy. The Imperium of Horus controls Terra, much of the Segmentum Solar, and many worlds that either betrayed the Emperor or were conquered by force. It is the most powerful entity militarily, but is internally torn by conflicts between its legions and the demands of the dark gods. If Horus is completely subjugated to chaos, Scenario A, this Imperium will quickly degenerate into a collection of demon worlds and cultist states. If Horus retains control, Scenario B, He attempts to create a stable empire where chaos is used as a tool rather than a ruling ideology, an effort doomed to failure in the long term, but capable of enduring for decades or even centuries. Guilliman's Ultramar proclaims itself the true heir to the Emperor's legacy. Robute rejects the father's divinity, maintaining the rational Imperial Truth, but is forced to compromise, allowing the cult of the Emperor to form among the populace as a means of maintaining morale. Ultramar becomes a model state with an effective administration, but it is beset by enemies on all sides and gradually shrinking under pressure. Terra Incognita are scattered enclaves of loyalists across the galaxy, simply trying to survive. Some worlds refuse to acknowledge Horus's victory and declare independence, while others become bases for guerrilla operations by the surviving Astartes. These fragments are too disunited to form a unified force, but numerous enough to be a constant thorn in the side of the traitors. The most pressing question is the fate of the Astronomican. In Scenario A, it either goes out completely or transforms into a demonic parody, turning the warp not into a space for travel, but into a trap for ships. Warp travel becomes more dangerous than ever, and the galaxy effectively fragments into isolated sectors. In Scenario B, Horus attempts to keep the Astronomican functional through mass sacrifices or the use of captured psychers. This allows his empire to remain coherent, but it transforms the Astronomican into a beacon fueled by suffering, which has consequences for the nature of the warp around it. Evolution of the Traitor Legions. The centuries following victory transform the Traitor Legions in ways that would make them unrecognizable even to their heresy-era selves. The Sons of Horus are undergoing an identity crisis. If Horus is dead or incapacitated, Scenario C, they splinter into warring factions of warlords, each claiming the War Master's legacy. If Horus rules, Scenario B, they become the Praetorian Guard, the elite of the new empire, but gradually corrupted by absolute power and the influence of chaos until they become the Black Legion under a different name. The word-bearers thrive in this new era. They spread across the galaxy, converting entire worlds to the worship of chaos, building dark temples and performing planet-scale rituals. Lorgar either becomes the high priest of the new theocracy or, in a fit of belated epiphany, realizes the enormity of what he has unleashed and falls into self-exile or madness. Perturabo's Iron Warriors continue to do what they do best, build fortresses and wage sieges. They could become mercenaries, selling their services to other legions, or they could attempt to carve out their own empire based on brutal efficiency and technological superiority. World Eaters degenerate completely into berserkers, incapable of anything but killing. They become weapons that other legions use against their enemies, or they disperse across the galaxy as bands of crazed killers, leaving only dead worlds in their wake. The Thousand Sons gain access to the Black Library of Terra and other repositories of forbidden knowledge. Magnus either seeks a way to reverse his curse or immerses himself entirely in the study of the warp, becoming a demon Primarch before his time. The Legion becomes a cabal of powerful sorcerers, manipulating events from the shadows. The Death Guard spreads Grandfather Nurgle's gifts across the galaxy with alarming efficiency. Entire sectors are transformed into plague wastelands, where life and death are intermingled beyond recognition. Mortarion becomes a demon Primarch and master of countless plague fleets. The Emperor's children disappear into their twisted pleasure worlds, no longer concerned with galactic politics. Fulgrim reaches apotheosis, becoming a demon prince of Slaanesh, and the Legion disintegrates into cults, each pursuing their own versions of perfection through excess. The Night Lords become mercenaries and terrorists, selling their services to the highest bidder. Without the unifying figure of Conrad Kurz, if he is dead by this point, the Legion ultimately fragments into independent warbands. The Alpha Legion continues to play its multi-pronged game. It's possible that some cells of the Legion are even secretly working with the Loyalists, following some hidden plan of Alpharius and Omegon, the purpose of which is clear to no one but themselves. The fate of humanity under the rule of chaos. For the ordinary people of the Imperium, Horus's victory marks the beginning of an era of unimaginable suffering. Depending on which legion controls a given world, the fate of the population ranges from swift death to eternal torment. Worlds under the control of the word-bearers become theocracies, where every aspect of life is subordinated to the worship of chaos. The population spends its days in rituals and sacrifices, never knowing when the gods will demand its blood. Children grow up knowing only service to the dark gods, and the cult becomes the only reality they know. The Death Guard worlds are descending into disease and decay, but paradoxically, their populations may not even consider this terrible. Nurgle's gifts dull the pain and bring a strange acceptance of their fate. Life continues in a grotesque parody of normality, where rotting peasants till plague-ridden fields and sick children play among the corpses. The World Eater's worlds simply die. The Legion descends, slays all who can resist, enslaves the rest, and departs, leaving behind deserts of bones. Worlds under Horus's direct control, in Scenario B, may even prosper materially. The War Master always valued efficiency. But the spiritual cost is horrific. The populace knows they serve a traitor, that the old values of the Imperium were a lie, and that their future belongs to chaos. Despair and nihilism become epidemic among those educated enough to understand the reality of their situation. The most important factor is the lack of hope. In Canon 40K, despite all the bleakness, there is faith in the Emperor, the idea that humanity is fighting for its survival against darkness. In the world of a victorious Horus, this hope is dead. The Emperor has lost. Chaos has won. The rational universe promised by the Imperial Truth has proven a lie. Only submission or death remains. This psychological change could be the most devastating long-term consequence. Generations growing up in this reality will be fundamentally different from those who lived in the Imperium. They will be more cynical, harsher, and more accepting of corruption as a norm. The Galaxy in 1,000 Years. By the end of the first millennium after Horus's victory, the galaxy becomes unrecognizable. Main development scenarios. Scenario A, Triumph of Chaos. If Horus is completely subjugated to the gods and Terra becomes the new Eye of Terror, human civilization enters the terminal stages of collapse. The warp completely consumes a significant portion of the galaxy. New warp rifts open throughout the Milky Way, transforming once inhabited worlds into demonic realms. The Astronomican is either dead or transformed into a demonic beacon, making warp travel virtually impossible for those not serving chaos. Human civilization is fragmenting into isolated clusters of worlds, each slowly falling into corruption or being destroyed by demonic incursions. By this point, the Traitor Legions had completely transformed into demonic hosts. The lines between mortal and demon blurred beyond recognition. The traitor Primarchs had all become demon princes, each ruling their own realm in the warp and raiding the material realm as the gods commanded or their own whims dictated. But even in this nightmare, there's a curious paradox. Chaos bears the seeds of its own destruction. The dark gods war with each other as intensely as they do with external enemies. Demon Primarchs of various patrons wage war among themselves. The worlds of Nurgle attack the worlds of Tzeentch. The warriors of Khorne clash with the cultists of Slaanesh. The unity achieved at the moment of victory over the Emperor crumbles, and the Imperium of Chaos descends into endless civil war. Amidst this chaos, small pockets of humanity survive on the fringes of the galaxy, concealing their existence from the demonic legions. They develop cultures radically different from the Imperium. Some reject all technology, descending to feudal levels in an attempt to hide from the attention of chaos. Others move in the opposite direction, developing AI and forbidden technologies in a desperate attempt to find a weapon against the demons. The Loyalist legions are either completely destroyed or degenerate into small bands of survivors, continuing their guerrilla warfare for centuries. Their genetic legacy is dissipating, as the creation of new Astartes becomes nearly impossible without the Imperium's infrastructure. Scenario B, Rotting Empire. If Horus retained control and attempted to build a stable empire using chaos as a tool, the result would still be tragic, but in a very different way. Imagine an Imperium that looks like the original, with bureaucracy, war machine, and trade routes, but is spiritually rotting from within. Horus on the Golden Throne, or his successor if the War Master ultimately fell to chaos, rules through a system of legionary warlords, each controlling a sector like a feudal lord. The Astronomican remains functional, but feeds on millions of victims daily. Ships travel through the warp, but are forced to perform chaos-purifying rituals before each jump. The Adeptus Mechanicus has been replaced by the Dark Mechanics, which creates demon-possessed machines as often as regular technology. The ruling elite, Astartes of the Traitor Legions and human warlords serving chaos, live in decadent luxury, while the masses languish in poverty and fear. But, crucially, the system functions. Worlds pay their tithes, armies gather and march to war. Trade continues. Ironically, The Emperor's cult survives even here, but in a radically distorted form. For the billions of people living on the periphery of this empire, far from the centers of power, the mythology of the fallen god emperor blends with the worship of new overlords. Syncretic cults arise, venerating Horus as a martyr to chaos, and the emperor as his precursor, or a sacrifice necessary for the new order. After a millennium, this empire begins to face fundamental problems. The corruption of chaos cannot be contained indefinitely. Mutations are spreading among the population. Demonic incursions are becoming more frequent. Psychics are being born at an accelerating rate, many of them immediately possessed. The main problem is demographic. Constant sacrifices, wars, plagues, and demonic incursions are decimating the population faster than it can replenish itself. Worlds are becoming deserted. Entire sectors are becoming dead zones. The empire is slowly but inexorably shrinking, consumed by the warp it fed with its rituals. Scenario B: endless war. If the emperor's death resulted in Horus's incapacitation or death, the galaxy descends into a state of permanent war of all against all. This is perhaps the most dynamic, but also the most chaotic of all scenarios. Without a central authority, the Traitor Legions immediately begin a struggle for hegemony. Every warlord lays claim to the mantle of Horus. Terra changes hands numerous times. One year it's controlled by the Sons of Horus, the next by Perturabo's Iron Warriors. Then the Word-Bearers arrive and establish a theocracy, which is overthrown by the Night Lords in an act of senseless terrorism. This instability paradoxically provides an opportunity for the Loyalists. Guilliman's Ultramar not only survives but thrives relative to other regions, because the traitors are too busy fighting each other to focus on its destruction. Robute is slowly rebuilding a small but stable empire, emulating the best aspects of the original Imperium. Other loyalist Primarchs establish their own enclaves. The Space Wolves transform their region into a confederation of warrior worlds, blending Viking culture with guerrilla warfare against chaos. The Salamanders establish a network of fortified forge worlds, specializing in the production of weapons for the resistance. The galaxy is effectively balkanizing. There is no single Imperium, but a multitude of successor states, from tiny systems to entire sectors, each with its own ideology and power structure. Some remain faithful to the Emperor's ideals, others have fallen to chaos, and still others are declaring independence from both. Warp travel becomes incredibly dangerous not only because of demons, but also because of pirates, warlords, and rival fleets. Interstellar trade is reduced to a minimum. Worlds become isolated, developing unique cultures and technological paths. After a millennium of this endless war, a strange balance emerges. No faction can achieve absolute victory, but all are too stubborn to surrender. The war becomes self-sustaining. Entire generations are born, live, and die, knowing only conflict. Worlds specialize in producing soldiers and weapons because it is the only way to survive. The fate of humanity as a species. Regardless of the specific scenario, humanity after Horus's victory undergoes a transformation that calls into question the very definition of human: genetic degradation and mutation. The effects of chaos inevitably lead to mass mutations among the population. Over generations, purebred humans become increasingly rare. On worlds controlled by chaos, mutation is not simply accepted, but often cultivated as a blessing of the gods. Entire subspecies of Homo sapiens emerge, adapted to life in warp-corrupted worlds. On loyalist worlds, mutants are treated with the traditional fear and hatred, but even here mutation rates are rising. Guilliman and other loyalist leaders are forced to make a painful choice: exterminate the mutants and risk demographic collapse, or embrace them and risk the spiritual purity of their societies. Psychic evolution. The birth rate of psychers has increased dramatically since the fall of the Emperor. Without a centralized system of black ships to gather and train them, psychers pose an existential threat to any world. Every untrained psyker is a potential portal for demons. Various societies are developing their own solutions to this problem. Some worlds simply kill all psychers at birth, accepting technological regression as the price of survival. Others attempt to train them themselves, creating local psyker schools with varying success. Chaos worlds openly employ psychers as sorcerers and priests, accepting the risk of possession. Within millennia, humanity may begin a natural evolution into a psychic species similar to the Eldar. But without the Emperor's guidance, this process is wild and uncontrolled, producing as many monsters as blessed individuals. Cultural fragmentation. Perhaps the most significant change is the complete loss of a unified human identity. The Imperium, despite all its faults, fostered the idea of human unity. With its fall, that idea dies. Over millennia of isolation, worlds develop cultures so distinct that their inhabitants may not recognize each other as a single species. A world controlled by the word-bearers, where generations were raised in the worship of chaos, has more in common with demons than an isolated agri-world on the edge of the galaxy, where legends of the Emperor have devolved into vague myths about the Golden King of the Stars. Linguistic divergence reaches the point where the descendants of the Imperial colonists can no longer communicate with each other. Gothic fragments into thousands of dialects, and then into distinct languages. Technological levels range from feudal worlds with bows and swords, to high-tech fortress worlds whose defense systems are so automated that the population may not even understand how they function. The question of survival of the species. The fundamental question: can humanity survive in the long term after Horus's victory? In Scenario A, the answer is likely no. Complete absorption by chaos leads to a terminal stage where humanity, as a concept, loses its meaning. What remains are the servants of chaos, demons incarnate, who may trace their origins to Homo sapiens but are no longer Homo sapiens in any meaningful sense. Scenario B is a possible scenario of slow decline to extinction. Constant attrition from sacrifice, mutation, and war creates a demographic death spiral. Worlds die faster than new ones can be populated. Sooner or later, even Horus's vast empire will exhaust its human resources. Scenario B offers more hope, ironically. Fragmentation means that different human societies may find different paths to survival. Some will perish, but others will adapt. Humanity will survive, but not as a single species or civilization, but as a multitude of disparate groups, each with its own path. Galactic context, reaction of other races. Eldar, bitter satisfaction and new threats. For the Eldar, the fall of the Emperor is a complex mix of emotions. On the one hand, they warned of the dangers of chaos and the arrogance of a young race. Seeing humanity fall just as they predicted brings a grim satisfaction. On the other hand, Horus's victory makes the galaxy much more dangerous for the Eldar. Humanity under the Emperor's rule was a problem. Aggressive, xenophobic, but relatively predictable. Humanity under chaos is an existential threat. Craft worlds are forced to radically reconsider their survival strategy. Ulthwé and the other major craft worlds are increasing their isolation, using their psychic abilities to evade the attention of the growing forces of chaos. They may even begin migrating to the eastern fringes of the galaxy, away from the expanding Eye of Terror and the new eye that has formed in the place of Terra. The Seers are working overtime, trying to find a path forward that doesn't lead to the galaxy being completely consumed by chaos. Some of them are reaching a terrifying conclusion. Perhaps the creation of Inied, the Eldar god of death, is the only way to save the galaxy, even if it requires the sacrifice of every remaining Eldar. The Dark Eldar of Kamarok are paradoxically thriving. The expansion of chaos's influence across the material galaxy means more chaos, more suffering, more souls to harvest. They raid chaos worlds as readily as loyalist ones, harvesting their share of agony. But even they understand that if chaos prevails completely, the webway could be compromised, and then even Kamarok will no longer be safe. The Harlequins and Inari, if they exist in this timeline, are working on long-term plans to counter chaos. They may even be attempting to contact the surviving loyalists, offering alliances unthinkable in Canon 40K. Guilliman, a pragmatist, might even accept such aid, to the dismay of the more orthodox loyalists. One particularly intriguing scenario: if the Inari exist, they may see the Emperor's fall as an opportunity. The Emperor, as an incredibly powerful psychic entity, could, in principle, become the foundation for Iniad. Perhaps Eldar agents were even secretly working to direct events toward this outcome, seeing the Emperor's death as a lesser evil than eternal stagnation on the Golden Throne. Orks, the best of times. For the Orks, Horus's victory marks the dawn of a golden age. The galaxy is plunged into all-out war, exactly what the Orks love most. Wah, everywhere. As the Imperium's centralized resistance weakens, Ork Wahs reach levels unseen since the War of the Beast. Warlords lead billion-strong hordes across the galaxy, attacking traitors, loyalists, and Xenos alike. An interesting aspect: Orks don't differentiate between loyalists and traitors. For them, it's all just umies for a fight. In fact, Chaos Space Marines can be even more attractive targets because they are often larger, mutated, and more menacing, the perfect opponents for a good fight. Technological evolution. Constant warfare can lead to the emergence of Ork mechs of unprecedented ingenuity. They begin to copy and adapt Chaos technology, creating Ork-made demon engines. The results range from catastrophic to astonishingly effective. New warlords. In this chaos, a new generation of Ork warlords is emerging, perhaps even of the caliber of the beast. One particularly ambitious warlord may even attempt to seize Terra, not out of any strategic calculation, but simply because it's the biggest and best place to fight in the galaxy. The Orks, ironically, can become a stabilizing factor. They attack everyone equally, meaning no faction can achieve complete dominance. A Chaos realm, poised for its next conquest, is suddenly hit by a WOG attack and forced to divert resources. A loyalist enclave, surrounded by traitors, gains an unexpected reprieve when the Orks attack its besiegers. Tau, cautious expansion or premature destruction. For the Tau, the fall of the Imperium could be either their greatest opportunity or their greatest disaster, depending on when exactly Horus's victory occurs relative to their own development. If the Tau are still young, just beginning their initial expansion, they might not even immediately notice the fall of Terra. Their eastern fringe of the galaxy is relatively isolated from events in the solar segmentum. They continue their expansion, gradually encountering fragments of human civilization, some loyalist, some fall into chaos, some independent. For the Tau, this poses a serious ideological problem. The greater good is founded on the idea that all races can be united under rational rule. But how can one integrate humans who either worship demonic entities or are fanatical xenophobes fighting against impossible odds? Some human enclaves may even embrace the greater good, seeing it as the last hope for order in a chaotic galaxy. If the Tau are more advanced, several spheres of expansion completed, they might try to take advantage of the chaos. A diplomatic race, they could offer alliances to surviving loyalist enclaves, providing technology and support in exchange for their embrace of the greater good. Guilliman, desperate for any allies, might even consider such an offer. But there's also a grim possibility. The Chaos Legions, particularly the Word-bearers, might see the naive Tau as ideal victims for conversion. Imagine Tau fall into chaos. Their technological sophistication combined with demonic power could create a terrifying enemy. Or worse, Tau inadvertently opening their worlds to demons through misunderstood warp experiments, attempting to understand the nature of the forces that destroyed the Imperium. The Ethereals would face a crisis of faith. While the official doctrine holds that the greater good will inevitably triumph through its rationality, the fall of the Imperium to the irrational forces of chaos calls this certainty into question. Schisms within the Tau are possible. Some advocate isolationism and increased defenses against warp influence, while others advocate aggressive expansion to establish order before the galaxy descends into complete chaos. Necrons, awakening in the apocalypse. The Necrons, slowly awakening from a million-year slumber, wake to a galaxy utterly different from the one they remember. On the one hand, the expansion of chaos is precisely what the Necrons feared most. The ancients remember the war in heaven, when the old ones created warp entities that became the chaos gods. Seeing the warp begin to consume material reality once again is, for them, a replay of that ancient nightmare. On the other hand, chaos among the young races could be an opportunity. A divided humanity, warring Eldar preoccupied with their own problems, no one can organize a coordinated resistance to the awakening Necrons. Imhotep the Merciless, if he has already awakened, may see this situation as an opportunity to realize his ambition to reunite the Necron dynasties under his rule. With the human Imperium no longer a unified threat, the various Necron dynasties could begin an aggressive campaign to reclaim their ancient holdings. Traz the Infinite and other Necron archivists may possess knowledge of how to counter chaos, perhaps even superweapons from the war in heaven. Imagine a scenario where the surviving loyalist Primarchs are forced to seek an alliance with the Necrons, making a deal with the devil to combat even worse demons. The Necrons' Project Pariah, a plan to create psi-null organisms to counter the warp, could be accelerated. With the spread of chaos, some Necron lords might even see it as an existential necessity. Either they close the warp forever, or the galaxy will be consumed. One eerily ironic scenario: the Necrons, desperate to close the widening warp rifts, might attempt to conquer Terra and use the remains of the Golden Throne for their own purposes. Imagine ancient Necron technology combined with the remains of the Emperor's greatest creation to create a device capable of sealing the warp locally at the cost of turning entire systems into dead zones where even the soul cannot exist. Tyranids, galactic buffet. When the Hive fleets first reach the galaxy in this timeline, they find a situation that can only be described as ideal for them. A divided humanity means a lack of coordinated defense. Worlds, exhausted by centuries of war and sacrifice, cannot mount an effective resistance. Biomass is everywhere, and much of it has already been pre-processed by chaos, mutations and changes that the Tyranids can assimilate and adapt. But there are also problems for the Great Devourer. Worlds completely consumed by chaos can be toxic to Tyranids. Demonic corruption of the flesh can poison the biomass, making it unfit for consumption. Some Hive fleets may even suffer from attempts to assimilate corrupted biomass, creating altered forms of Tyranids that are either more effective or unpredictable and dangerous to the hive mind itself. Moreover, the Tyranids will have to contend with the Necrons, who are actively awakening and rebuilding their kingdoms, as well as the Ork which has reached unprecedented proportions. The galaxy is turning into a multifaceted slaughter: chaos versus the Loyalists, both factions versus the Necrons, the Tyranids devouring everyone, the Orks fighting everyone for pleasure, and the Eldar attempting to manipulate events from the shadows. An interesting possibility: Tyranids, by consuming chaos worlds, may evolve resistance to warp influence. Over enough generations, they could develop bioforms specifically adapted to combat demons, creatures with psionic null force characteristics, or the ability to seal warp rifts with their presence. This would make them unintentional allies in the fight against chaos, though an ally that's still trying to devour your entire planet isn't much comfort. Interracial conflicts and alliances. In this fractured galaxy, traditional lines of conflict are blurred. Alliances unthinkable in Canon 40K are emerging. Loyalist Eldar coalitions against the common enemy of chaos. Guilliman, ever the pragmatist, may forge formal treaties with some craft worlds. Space Marines fighting side by side with aspect warriors is a sight that would make the canonical emperor turn in his grave, had he ever had one. Tau human states, where surviving imperial worlds integrate into the Tau Empire, bringing technological knowledge from the dark age of technology in exchange for protection and stability. Over several generations, a hybrid culture can form, combining the best aspects of both civilizations. Necron-Eldar coalitions against chaos. Ancient alliances from the War in Heaven are reborn, this time against a common threat. Illich Nightingale and Traz the Endless, sworn enemies in canon, may find common ground in the need to close the widening warp rifts. Even the most unlikely: temporary truces between Loyalists and some Traitor Legions against external threats. If a Tyranid hive fleet attacks a region containing both Loyalist and Traitor forces, both sides might negotiate a short-term truce to ensure survival. Perturabo's Iron Warriors, ever practical, might even prefer to work with the Loyalists against the Tyranids than to see the galaxy devoured entirely. Philosophical and theological implications. The collapse of the Imperial Truth. The Emperor built his imperium on a foundation of rationalism and atheism, the Imperial Truth. Religion was declared superstition, and the warp was explained as a psychic dimension governed by laws, even if they were not fully understood. Horus's victory completely shatters this philosophy. Chaos is real. Gods exist. Demons can materialize and tear people apart. Prayers to the dark gods bring real power. The Emperor's rational universe has been revealed as a lie, or at best, an incomplete truth. For the surviving Loyalists, this creates a spiritual crisis of unimaginable proportions. If the Emperor, the embodiment of rationality and strength, could fall, what does that say about the nature of reality? Many turn to religion, not the cult of chaos, but to new forms of faith that seek meaning in a meaningless universe. Paradoxically, the Emperor's cult, which he himself rejected, may grow even stronger among the Loyalists. If chaos won because of the gods, perhaps the Emperor was also a god, just a defeated one. Or perhaps he sacrificed himself to save humanity in a way we don't yet understand. Religious narratives offer solace and meaning, where rational explanations lead only to despair. Guilliman, a strict rationalist, faces an impossible dilemma. He knows the Emperor rejected divinity, but he also sees that faith in the Emperor gives his people the strength to continue the fight. Suppressing the cult would be to deprive them of their last hope. Encouraging it would be to betray the memory of the Father. Ultimately, he can choose a pragmatic middle path, neither encourage the cult nor suppress it, allowing the people to believe what they need to survive. The question of the nature of evil. In Canon 40K, chaos is presented as absolute evil, a corruption against which there can be no compromise. But after Horus's victory, this black and white morality blurs. In Scenario B, where Horus attempts to control chaos, people emerge, living relatively normal lives under the rule of traitors. They pay taxes, work, and raise children. Yes, their government serves chaos, but most of them are simply trying to survive. Are they evil? Or victims of circumstance? Some Traitor Legions may even evolve away from pure evil. The Alpha Legion, if they truly had a higher purpose, may continue to work towards it. The Iron Warriors may become mercenaries who simply do the job for pay, with little regard for morality. They are corrupted by chaos, but retain a certain degree of professionalism. For loyalists, this raises a terrible question. Is it permissible to work with traitors under any circumstances? If the Iron Warriors offer aid against the Tyranids, should they accept it? Where do we draw the line between pragmatism and betrayal of principle? Evolution of chaos. It is interesting to consider how chaos itself can evolve after complete victory. In canon, the dark gods feed on conflict and the negative emotions generated by the struggle against them. But what happens when they win? When most of the galaxy already serves them? Perhaps chaos is beginning to consume itself. Without sufficient external conflict, the gods turn on each other with renewed fury. Demons of various patrons begin large-scale wars in the warp. Champions fight for the favor of their gods, destroying each other. This could lead to the phenomenon of self-limiting chaos. Chaos can expand only up to a certain point, after which internal conflicts become so intense that expansion stops. The galaxy reaches a terrible equilibrium. Parts are consumed by chaos and constantly war with themselves. Other parts resist on the periphery, and in between lies a contested zone of perpetual war. An alternative possibility: the emergence of a new chaos god. If enough people begin to worship the concept of resistance to chaos, hope in the face of despair, self-sacrifice for humanity, could this collective psychic energy give birth to a new warp god? Not virtuous in the usual sense, but embodying a specific aspect of the human spirit, a stubborn refusal to surrender even when all is lost. This would be a god of the last stand, of final resistance, of desperate hope. Alternative paths. Are salvations possible? Return of the Primarchs. In Canon 40K, Guilliman's return shifted the balance of power. In this timeline, something even more dramatic could happen: the return of not one, but several Primarchs simultaneously, or the emergence of completely unexpected figures. Vulcan, eternal and unkillable, finally returns from his wanderings. His discovery of a dead Terra could be the catalyst for uniting the disparate loyalist forces. Vulcan, with his compassion and humanity, could offer the moral center sorely lacking since the Emperor's death. Corvus Corax, should he survive and not pass into the Eye of Terror, may become a specter haunting the traitors, a legend of an avenger striking from the shadows, slaying the champions of chaos one by one in an endless war of vengeance. Lost Primarchs. In a moment of dire need, fate may return one or both of the lost Primarchs. Their appearance could be a sign that not all is lost, that there are forces at work at a deeper level than appears. An even more radical possibility: the Emperor's rebirth in some form. Not in his physical body, but as a psychic entity in the warp. After his death on the Spirit Avenger, his soul did not disperse, but instead consolidated in the warp, becoming a counterforce to chaos. Through millennia of worship and faith by billions of followers, this entity could become powerful enough to manifest. A god emperor, not metaphorically, but literally, a fifth god of chaos, yet one opposed to the other four. Technological solutions. In desperation, surviving human factions may turn to forbidden technologies. Artificial intelligence. With the Emperor dead and his ban on AI no longer absolute, Some besieged worlds may choose to activate ancient AI systems or create new ones. This is incredibly risky. The Men of Iron nearly wiped out humanity once, but in a situation of existential crisis, the risk may seem acceptable. AI unaffected by warp corruption could be a key advantage against chaos. Resurrection of Dark Age technologies. The loyalist Mechanicus, if such a thing still exists, may be forced to reinvent lost technologies rather than simply maintain existing ones. Without the machine cult's dogma to restrict innovation, technological advancement could accelerate. STC systems long thought lost could be activated in a desperate attempt to even the odds. Loyalist warp technology. If chaos uses the warp as a weapon, why can't the loyalists? Some radical inquisitors, if the Inquisition still exists, or psychers might begin exploring ways to harness psychic energy without falling into chaos. It's a dangerous path, but it could lead to the development of pure warp technology. Galactic coalition. The most optimistic possibility. Dire necessity unites all intelligent races in the galaxy against a common threat. Imagine a great coalition of loyalist legions, Eldar Craftmeres, the Tau Empire, moderate Necron dynasties, and even some Ork warlords smart enough to realize that if chaos wins completely, there won't be anyone left to put up a good fight. Such a coalition could coordinate a campaign to retake Terra. It would be the largest military operation in the history of the galaxy, the combined fleets of all races converging on Terra for the final battle for the soul of humanity and the fate of the galaxy. A second battle for Terra would be apocalyptic. The combined forces would face the full might of the Chaos Legions defending their capital. Loyalist battle barges would stand alongside Eldar craft worlds and Tau ships, attacking the orbital defenses that once protected humanity's holiest world, but now serve the dark gods. The outcome of such a battle could determine not only the fate of Terra, but the nature of the galaxy for the next 10,000 years. Conclusion: many paths into darkness. Horus's victory on the Spirit Avenger opens up not just one alternative path to history, but a whole range of possibilities, each more bleak than the last, but some with glimmers of hope in the darkness. In the worst-case scenario, the galaxy is slowly consumed by chaos, transforming into an expanded eye of terror, where material reality and the warp merge into a nightmare of impossible dimensions. Humanity as a species ceases to exist in any recognizable form, transforming into demonic servants of the dark gods. Other races are either destroyed or retreat to the distant fringes of the galaxy, leaving the center empty and dead. In a less absolute but still horrific scenario, the galaxy stabilizes in a state of permanent war. No single faction can achieve ultimate victory. The Imperium of Chaos controls the core regions, but constantly struggles with internal conflicts. Loyalist enclaves survive on the periphery, waging guerrilla warfare. Xenos pursue their own goals, sometimes clashing with human factions, sometimes forming temporary alliances. This is a galaxy without hope of final resolution, where war becomes a natural state and generations know only conflict. But there is also a faint hope for redemption. If the Loyalists can unite, if the Primarchs return, if the galactic races can put aside their differences in the face of existential threat, perhaps Terra can be reconquered. Perhaps a new order can be established, learning from the Emperor's mistakes, creating a more inclusive, less dogmatic civilization. Or perhaps the most poetic outcome, the Emperor, transformed by the death and faith of billions of worshippers across millennia, returns not as a man or even a Primarch, but as something more, a psychic entity powerful enough to confront the dark gods on their own soil. The final battle takes place not in the material galaxy, but in the warp itself, where the God Emperor battles the united forces of chaos for the soul of humanity. Whatever path history takes, one thing remains constant. In the darkness of the distant future, after Horus's victory, there is only war. But the nature of this war, its participants, its stakes, and its possible outcomes are fundamentally different from Canon 40K. This is not humanity's war for survival against a galaxy of enemies. It is a war of humanity's soul against corruption from within, a struggle for what it means to be human in a world where chaos has triumphed. And in this struggle, perhaps, lies the final lesson of alternate history. Even in the darkest timeline, even when all seems lost, as long as there remains at least one person who refuses to surrender, at least one heart still beating in resistance, hope is not entirely dead. It may be small, wounded, bloodied, but it remains. the last and greatest act of defiance against a tyrannical universe. In the grim darkness of the distant future, where Horus won, there is only war. But it is in this war, in the refusal to accept defeat even when the enemy stands in the ruins of your capital, in the stubbornness to continue the fight even when the gods themselves are against you. This is the true legacy of the Emperor. Not in the victory he never achieved, but in the example he set. Fight to the last breath. Never surrender in the face of impossible odds. Defend humanity at any cost. And if Horus won the battle, this war is far from over. On every world where loyalists resist, in every soldier who refuses to bend the knee to chaos, in every prayer to the dead emperor, the war continues. And while it continues, humanity still lives, no matter how divided and defeated it may seem. Such is the essence of this alternate timeline. Not the story of how the Imperium fell, but the story of what happens afterward. And it turns out that even after the greatest defeat, history doesn't end. It transforms, takes new forms, finds new paths. The galaxy continues to spin, the stars continue to burn, and somewhere in a dark corner of space, the survivors gather their strength, preparing for the next round of the eternal war. For in Warhammer 40,000, even in the most alternate alternative, there is only one constant: war. But the form of this war, its heroes and villains, its hopes and despairs, are infinitely variable. And in this variability lies the tragic potential of a universe where even gods may fall, but the struggle never ends. So, we've considered many possible paths for the galaxy to develop after Horus's hypothetical victory in the Siege of Terra. From the complete triumph of chaos to endless war between factions, from the extinction of humanity to its transformation into something entirely different. Whatever the scenario, one thing remains constant. In the grim darkness of the distant future, there is only war. But the nature of this war, its participants, and its possible outcomes are fundamentally different from canonical Warhammer 40,000. What do you think? Which scenario seems most likely? Could humanity survive under the rule of chaos? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm very interested to hear your theories. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to like and share the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. There are plenty of interesting alternative histories, lore analyses, and analytical essays on the 40K universe to come. Don't forget to turn on the bell to be the first to know about new videos. In future episodes, we'll continue exploring alternate Warhammer 40,000 timelines. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. May the Emperor protect you.